Ethan had been awake for almost 30 hours when the flight finally touched down. His eyes burned, his head ached, but his heart raced with a mix of excitement and fear. The airport speakers echoed overhead, muffled but familiar, and as the plane rolled to a stop, he felt a strange tightness in his chest. 2 years away from home had changed him in ways he never fully understood. He had boarded the first flight he could find, dragging 2 small suitcases filled with clothes, books, and pieces of a life he was trying to rebuild. He walked down the narrow aisle and into the bright terminal, scanning the crowd. He expected to see his mother smile, her arms open, her familiar voice cutting through the noise to call his name. Instead, he saw only his stepfather, Marcus, leaning against a pillar with crossed arms and a hard expression. For a moment, Ethan froze. He tried to smile, hoping Marcus would meet him halfway, but Marcus's face didn't change. There was no warmth, no sign of excitement, only a nod so stiff it felt like a gesture forced out of obligation. Ethan walked toward him, rolling his suitcase, forcing his tired body to move. When he finally reached him, Marcus said, "Welcome back," but his tone held no welcome. The words felt like hollow echoes bouncing off a wall. Marcus turned without another word and started walking toward the exit. Ethan followed, swallowing the small disappointment building in his chest. He told himself that people expressed emotions differently, that Marcus was tired or stressed or simply didn't show feelings the way others did. But deep down, he knew better. This wasn't new. Marcus had never made space for him. The drive home was silent. Rain tapped against the car windows, and the wipers dragged across the windshield in slow, tired motions. Ethan tried to talk small things, simple things. Things like how the weather overseas had been strange, or how he had almost missed his connecting flight. But every time he started speaking, Marcus responded with a short hum or a half-hearted mm. Eventually, Ethan fell silent too. He stared out the window, watching streetlights smear into long streaks of yellow. His chest tightened again. Something felt wrong, as if the air inside the car was too heavy to breathe. When they reached the house, Ethan paused before stepping inside. The brick walls looked the same as when he left, the door the same faded brown, the porch light still flickering like it had always done. But standing there again, he felt the weight of memories pressing down. He hoped his mother would open the door, pull him inside, and erase the awkwardness Marcus carried like a shadow. But she wasn't at the door. She wasn't in the hallway. She didn't appear when he dropped his bags by the stairs. Instead, the house greeted him with the cold quiet he remembered too well. Marcus stepped inside, kicked off his shoes, and went straight to the kitchen. Ethan followed, hoping to find his mother there, maybe cooking or making tea. When he entered, she was standing at the counter, wiping her hands with a towel. She looked up, her eyes lighting up for a split second, but then her expression faltered. There was happiness there, but also something else, something like guilt. She hugged him quickly, tightly, but when she pulled away, she stepped aside as if afraid to stand too close. "You're early," she said softly. "I thought you'd come next week." "I caught an earlier flight," Ethan said, smiling, trying not to sound disappointed. "Surprised you?" She nodded and glanced toward Marcus, who stood by the sink, arms crossed again. The tension between them hung in the air like thick fog. Ethan could feel it, even though no one spoke. He wondered if something had happened while he was away. Something big. Something that made his mother hesitate and Marcus grow colder than usual. But he didn't have the strength to ask. Not tonight. He carried his suitcases upstairs to his old room, which looked exactly the same as if it had been frozen in time. The bed was neatly made, the desk pushed against the window, the small lamp still leaning slightly to one side. He sat on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. Coming home was supposed to feel comforting. Instead, he felt like a stranger walking through the pages of an old memory. Later that night, after unpacking a few things, Ethan went downstairs to ask his mother if she wanted to talk. He found her in the living room, sitting on the sofa with her hands clasped tightly together. She looked tired, older than he remembered. She gave him a small smile when she saw him, but it didn't reach her eyes. Before Ethan could speak, Marcus walked in, his steps heavy, his expression unreadable. You think you can just walk back in and act like nothing happened? Marcus said suddenly. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. Ethan blinked, confused. What do you mean? Ethan asked. You left, Marcus said. You left us to handle everything. You didn't care how we struggled. Your mother worked double shifts, and you didn't bother to check in half the time. That's not true, Ethan said quietly, trying to stay calm. I called, I messaged. Most of the time, no one replied. Marcus scoffed. Excuses. Ethan looked at his mother, but she lowered her gaze. She didn't speak. That silence hurt more than Marcus's words. It was as if she agreed with him, or at least didn't want to challenge him. I sent money every month, Ethan said. Whatever I could save, that tiny amount. Marcus snapped. You think that helped? Ethan's heart sank. He had worked long hours while studying, skipping meals to send whatever extra cash he could. Hearing Marcus dismiss it like nothing made his chest tighten with anger and sadness. But before he could respond, Marcus stepped closer. You come home acting like some hero, Marcus said. But you're just Marcus, his mother whispered. Marcus ignored her. He grabbed Ethan by the arm, pulling him back a step. The grip wasn't strong enough to injure, but it shocked Ethan. For a moment, the world felt like it slowed down. The lamp in the corner flickered. The room seemed to shrink. Ethan's breath caught. He hadn't expected this. Not after 2 years. Not right after coming home. Stop, Ethan said, his voice shaking. Marcus pushed him against the wall. Not hard enough to leave a mark, but hard enough to show dominance. Hard enough to remind Ethan of the house's old rules. Hard enough to break whatever fragile hope he had carried home. Don't ever talk back to me, Marcus muttered. Ethan stared at him, stunned. He couldn't tell if the anger inside him came from fear, betrayal, or disappointment. Maybe all three. His mother rushed to them, placing her hands between them, whispering for them to stop. Marcus finally stepped back, breathing heavily. Ethan didn't move. He felt stuck in a moment he never wanted to relive. Marcus walked away, leaving the room without looking back. His mother stood there, trembling slightly, her eyes full of worry. But she didn't say anything. She didn't defend Ethan. She didn't ask if he was hurt. She simply whispered, "Let's keep the peace tonight," and walked to the kitchen. Ethan stood alone, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He thought coming home would fix something inside him, or at least fill the empty spaces left by long months of loneliness. Instead, he felt more alone than he ever had before. More abandoned. More betrayed. He returned to his room and closed the door quietly. He sat on the bed, staring at the floor, his heart pounding in steady, painful beats. He replayed the moment again and again, trying to understand what triggered Marcus's anger. But the truth was simple. The anger was always there. Marcus had always needed control. And Ethan returning stronger, older, independent maybe, that threatened him? That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He lay awake, listening to the distant rumble of thunder outside and the quiet creaks of the old house. He sensed something shifting inside him, something heavy and sharp. He didn't want revenge, not yet. But he wanted answers. He wanted the truth behind his mother's silence, Marcus's hostility, and the strange coldness surrounding the home he once knew. By morning, the feeling had not faded. If anything, it had grown stronger. Ethan knew this wasn't just a bad welcome. Something deeper was buried beneath the surface. And now that he was home, he was going to uncover it, heaven, if it forced him to face the darkest parts of his past. Even if it pushed him toward a path he never imagined he would take. If you want, I can write part 2 next in the same fast-paced, emotional 1800-word style. You said, explain part 2 in 1800 words. Write the story fast pace. Don't repeat things. Use simple words. Write in paragraph. WRITE, only the story. Story must be good, ChatGPT said. Below is part 2. Written in a single long narrative paragraph, fast-paced, simple language. About 1800 words. No repetition, no analysis. No commentary, only the story. Part 2. The conflict 1,800 words. Ethan woke before sunrise, his mind racing with everything that had happened the night before. He went downstairs hoping to speak with his mother alone, but the kitchen was empty and the house felt heavier than usual. He brewed a cup of tea, trying to settle the knot twisting in his stomach. As he drank it, his mother came in quietly, her eyes tired and her movements stiff. She smiled softly, but the sadness behind it made his chest tighten. He wanted to ask why she hadn't defended him, why she had stayed silent. But he saw the tension in her shoulders and knew she already felt guilty. Instead, he asked how she had been. She answered with short, practiced phrases, as if she didn't want to reveal too much. Ethan sensed that she wanted to speak, but didn't know how. Every time she tried, she stopped herself, glancing toward the hallway, afraid Marcus might overhear. That fear, too. That fear told Ethan everything he needed to know. Something in this house had changed in the last 2 years, and he intended to find out what. When Marcus entered the room, the air shifted instantly. His jaw was tight, his eyes sharp, and his steps heavy with irritation. He didn't look at Ethan. He didn't even look at his wife. He went straight for the coffee maker, grumbling about work and bills. Ethan said nothing, watching him carefully. Marcus's hands shook slightly as he poured his drink, which told Ethan the man wasn't as calm as he pretended. Marcus finally glanced at Ethan, the look cold and dismissive, as if the argument last night had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. But Ethan hadn't forgotten. The bruise blooming under his sleeve was enough of a reminder. He decided then that he couldn't let what happened power over him. Something inside him had changed, a quiet strength rising from the frustration he had suppressed for years. He wasn't the timid boy Marcus used to intimidate. He had survived alone in another country, worked countless hours to support himself. Faced struggles Marcus knew nothing about. He wasn't helpless anymore. Later that afternoon, Ethan walked around the neighborhood, needing space to think. He passed familiar houses, old shops, and streets full of memories, but none of them felt the same. He felt disconnected, as if the city he once knew had become foreign. He wondered if leaving had been a mistake. Maybe distance had broken the fragile bond he once shared with his mother. Or maybe the truth was that the bond had been fragile long before he left, and he had simply never seen it. As he walked, he thought about Marcus's anger, the strange guilt in his mother's eyes, and the quiet tension hanging inside the house. It wasn't just stress or frustration. It was fear. And fear meant something more had been happening during his absence. Something he needed to uncover. When he returned home, Marcus was in the living room watching television. His mother was cleaning the kitchen, moving quickly, as if trying to stay busy so she wouldn't have to speak. Ethan approached her gently and asked if she was okay. She nodded, but her hands kept trembling. He reached for her arm and she stopped, looking directly at him for the first time that day. Her eyes filled with something like apology, something like sorrow. Before she could speak, Marcus called her from the living room, his voice sharp. She pulled away and hurried toward him, leaving Ethan standing alone with questions hanging like weights around his neck. Over the next few days, Ethan watched every interaction between them. Marcus criticized small things, how the food was cooked, how the bills were arranged, how quiet the house was. Nothing pleased him. His mother responded calmly, but her voice carried exhaustion. Ethan noticed how she flinched whenever he raised his voice, even slightly. He noticed how she avoided sitting down, as if resting would draw Marcus's attention. And he noticed how Marcus glared every time Ethan entered the room, as if his presence threatened the fragile control Marcus held over the house. Ethan's anger deepened, but he held it tight, choosing to observe rather than react. He needed clarity before he made any decisions. One evening, while his mother washed dishes, Ethan stepped beside her and asked quietly, "Has he always been like this?" She hesitated, eyes fixed on the running water. "He gets stressed," she whispered. "Work has been hard." "It's not what I'm asking," Ethan said. She looked at him, fear flickering across her face before she forced a smile. "Don't worry, things will get better." But Ethan knew she didn't believe that. Later that night, when the house grew quiet, he went to the basement where Marcus kept important documents. He didn't plan on snooping, but something inside him felt like he needed answers that no one would give him. The basement smelled of dust and old cement, the dim bulb flickering as he searched through the clutter. He found unpaid bills, warnings from the bank, overdue notices, and letters filled with tension. Marcus wasn't struggling because of Ethan. He had been hiding financial trouble for years, letting his pride keep him from asking for help. The anger, the belittling, the constant pressure, these were Marcus's ways of releasing the frustration he refused to face. Ethan felt a mix of anger and pity. Marcus wasn't just cruel. He was drowning, and instead of reaching for help, he had chosen to drag everyone around him underwater too. As Ethan placed the papers back, he heard footsteps behind him. He froze, then turned slowly. His mother stood at the bottom of the stairs, her face pale. "What are you doing?" She whispered urgently. "Trying to understand," he said softly. She shook her head, gripping the railing. "You shouldn't be down here." If he finds out Ethan stepped forward, what is he going to do? Blame me for trying to protect you. She squeezed her eyes shut, and a tear slipped down her cheek. Ethan felt something inside him, ignited determination stronger than anger. He wanted to protect her, to pull her out of this cycle she had been forced into for years. He realized then that revenge wasn't just about what Marcus had done to him, but about what he had done to her. She had endured his temper, his manipulation, his financial secrets, and his controlling behavior. And she had done it alone. When she opened her eyes again, she looked at Ethan with a mixture of love and fear. "Please," she whispered, "don't make things worse." Ethan felt his heart break at those words. She wasn't asking him to protect himself. She was asking him to protect her from the fallout. He nodded slowly, but inside, he was already forming a plan. One driven by anger, but by the need to free them both. In the following days, Ethan played the role of a quiet observer while gathering everything he needed. He saved copies of documents, took photos of Marcus's angry outbursts, recorded the subtle ways he manipulated conversations. He didn't plan on using any of it violently or cruelly. His goal wasn't to hurt Marcus physically, it was to dismantle his power. He saw Marcus for what he was, a man who built his identity on control. Someone who needed others to feel smaller so he could feel important. If that control was taken from him, he would crumble. Ethan understood that. But he didn't rush. He waited, he watched, he studied. He learned the patterns of Marcus's behavior when he came home angry, when he left early, when he argued with his wife, when he avoided certain topics. Ethan began to anticipate each shift, preparing himself for the moment he would confront Marcus, not with fists or shouting, but with truth. The more Ethan saw, the stronger his resolve grew. One particular night, Marcus returned late, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Ethan's mother jumped, but she didn't move. Ethan stood beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. Marcus stormed into the living room, shouting about work and disrespect. Ethan's mother tried to calm him, but Marcus turned on her, pointing out things she hadn't done, blaming her for problems she had no control over. Ethan watched, his jaw clenched, his heart pounding. He stepped forward, ready to intervene, but his mother shook her head slightly, silently begging him not to escalate the moment. He stepped back, but inside, something shifted. This wasn't simply anger or frustration. This was emotional harm disguised as stress, and Ethan refused to let it continue. After Marcus went to bed, Ethan sat on the living room sofa, staring at the dark window. His mother sat beside him quietly, her hands in her lap. She didn't speak, but her presence told him she was holding onto something fragile, hope. He didn't want to shatter it, but he also didn't want her to continue living in fear. He finally spoke, keeping his voice gentle. "Mom, you deserve better than this." She looked at him, her eyes filled with pain. "It's not that simple," she whispered. "I've tried to keep the peace." "Peace isn't silence," Ethan said. "Peace isn't fear." She looked away, tears building, but he continued softly. "I'm not going to let him keep hurting you, or me. I won't let this house break us." She didn't respond, but she didn't disagree either. The next day, Ethan made his decision. He wasn't going to wait for another confrontation. He wasn't going to let Marcus control the narrative. He would gather every piece of truth and use it to free his mother and himself. Not by shouting, not by pushing back physically, but by showing Marcus what he feared most: losing dominance over the life he had built. Ethan saw clearly now. Revenge didn't always come as fire or fists. Sometimes revenge was justice, truth, and the strength to break free from someone who believed you would always stay weak. And Ethan was no longer that weak boy. He was ready. Alina woke before sunrise on the third day with a clarity she had never felt before. The house was silent in a way that made her aware of every breath she took, every thought that passed through her mind, every decision she had been pushing toward. She knew today mattered not because something dramatic would happen, but because she could feel the balance inside the house shifting. Her confidence was growing, and her stepfather sensed it. He had avoided her since she refused him the night before, and that avoidance told her more than any confrontation could. He was unsettled by her calmness, by her steady voice, by the way she looked him in the eye without trembling. It wasn't the fear of hurt, it was the fear of losing the control he built over years. She saw it in the way he paused when she entered the room, the way he observed her movements, the way he questioned her tone even when she said something simple. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt a weight pressing on her, reminding her that the climax of their story was approaching. And she had to choose her path carefully. Her revenge couldn't be rushed. It had to be intentional, because once the moment came, she wouldn't be able to turn back. She spent the morning helping her mother in the kitchen, speaking softly, making sure her mother felt less alone. Her mother still moved as if afraid to disturb the air, always careful, always watching for signs from her husband. Alina saw the tiredness in her mother's eyes, the longing for peace, the quiet wish for strength she didn't know how to find. The realization hit Alina harder than she expected. Her mother had lived like this for years, longer than Alina, longer than she could imagine. The thought deepened Elena's resolve. Her revenge wasn't just for herself anymore. It was for her mother, for all the moments she swallowed sadness and fear. Alina looked around the kitchen and realized this house didn't feel like hers anymore. It felt like a battlefield she didn't choose, but one she could walk through without shaking. For the first time, she could see a future where she wasn't trapped by his shadow. That future depended on what she did next. And she felt the weight of that truth settling on her shoulders. Her stepfather entered the kitchen shortly after noon, clearing his throat in a way that made everyone stand straighter. He greeted her mother first, then looked at Alina with a distant expression. She met his gaze with calm eyes, and she saw him flinch not physically, but in the quiet shift of his expression. He began giving instructions again, small ones, things he expected everyone to follow without hesitation. Alina listened, let him finish, and then said one word: no. Her voice was steady, almost gentle, yet it carried a firmness that made the room freeze. Her mother looked terrified. Her stepfather stared at her with disbelief. For years, her no was something he dismissed, ignored, or punished. But now, that simple word changed the energy in the room. He narrowed his eyes and asked if she was trying to challenge him. She told him she wasn't challenging him. She was making a choice. Her tone wasn't rebellious, it was controlled, thoughtful, and grounded. That seemed to irritate him more than defiance ever would. He raised his voice slightly, trying to reclaim authority, but Alina didn't react. She didn't step back or lower her head. She simply stood her ground, letting the silence between them speak louder than words. He stepped closer, expecting her to flinch. She didn't. Instead, she looked at him the way someone looks at a stranger. They no longer fear. That look shook him. He wasn't used to being seen without the authority he wrapped around himself. The tension in the kitchen felt heavy, and Alina could hear her mother's shaky breathing nearby. But Alina didn't waver. She waited for him to speak, waited for him to make the next move. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she expected. He asked her what she wanted. Not in a kind way, but in a way that revealed his confusion. He truly didn't understand how she transformed so quickly. Alina took a deep breath and told him she wanted respect. She wanted peace. She wanted to be treated like an adult who had lived her own life, made her own choices, carried her own experiences. She said she had come home hoping for warmth, not control. And then she said something she never said before. She didn't hate him. That surprised him. She didn't hate him because hate required too much energy. What she felt was disappointment, and that disappointment gave her strength. He looked startled, almost uncertain, because he wasn't used to being spoken to with honesty instead of fear. The air thickened as he processed her words. Alina watched the conflict in his eyes, the tug-of-war between his pride and a faint hint of understanding. It was the first crack in his armor she had ever seen, and she knew this was her moment. This was the climax of her story, the point where revenge and forgiveness stood side by side, waiting for her to choose. She felt an ache in her chest as she looked at him, remembering all the years she swallowed her pain, all the moments she stayed silent so others could feel comfortable. She wasn't sure if revenge would heal her or destroy her. She wasn't sure if forgiveness would free her or trap her again. But she knew this moment required a decision that would shape her future. So she told him something he didn't expect. She was leaving. Not running away, not escaping, but choosing her own path. She said she had outgrown the house that once felt like a cage, and she wasn't going to shrink herself to fit in it anymore. Her mother's eyes widened with fear and relief at the same time. Her stepfather looked stunned, as if the idea of her leaving on her own terms never crossed his mind. He tried to argue, but Alina remained calm. She told him she wasn't asking for permission. She was stating her choice. And then she delivered the final blow, not in anger, but in truth. She said the reason she changed wasn't because she had become stronger overnight. It was because she realized he wasn't as powerful as she once believed. She said fear gave him strength, and she wasn't afraid anymore. That truth hit him harder than any physical act ever could. His face shifted, not with anger, but with something deeper. Perhaps the realization that his power had always depended on her silence. For the first time, Alina saw him not as the force that controlled her life, but as a man who didn't know how to handle someone who refused to fear him. That realization was her victory. A quiet, profound victory that settled inside her like warm light. He stepped back, unsure of what to say. Alina didn't wait for an answer. She turned to her mother, squeezed her hand gently, and said she would help her if she ever wanted to leave too. Her mother's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of hope. Alina walked out of the kitchen with a steady pace, her heart thumping with both fear and relief. Her stepfather didn't follow. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten her. He simply stood there in silence, understanding in that moment that he had lost the grip he once had. Alina felt a strange mixture of power and sadness. This wasn't the dramatic revenge she once imagined. She didn't expose him or break him. Instead, she took away the thing he valued most, his ability to control her. That was the deepest form of revenge she could choose as she returned to her room to pack her things. She felt lighter than she had in years. She realized revenge wasn't always about making someone suffer. Sometimes it was about choosing yourself after years of choosing fear. She folded her clothes with steady hands, looked around the room one last time, and felt no attachment to the shadows that once lived there. She knew leaving would change everything. It would free her. It would show her mother another path. It would remind her stepfather that control wasn't the same as respect. She zipped her suitcase and stood by the door, breathing in deeply. She didn't know what waited for her outside this house, but she knew it would be better than what she was leaving behind. Today was the climax of her story, and she chose strength over vengeance, truth over silence, and freedom over fear. Alina walked out of the house with her suitcase rolling behind her, the weight of years finally lifting from her shoulders as the sun dipped low behind the rooftops. The street felt different now, open, wide, full of possibilities she never allowed herself to imagine while living under her stepfather's control. She didn't look back immediately, not because she didn't care, but because looking back meant acknowledging how much she had endured. After a few steps, she paused and glanced at the house, not with bitterness, but with quiet acceptance. This house once held her fears, her worries, her silence, but now it held only her past. She turned away and continued down the street, her heart beating fast, not from fear, but from the strange freedom building inside her. Each step made her feel more certain that leaving was the right choice. She didn't need revenge that caused destruction. She needed revenge that rebuilt her. And walking away on her own terms. It's the most powerful revenge she could imagine. She stayed with her friend Lila for the next few days. And the difference in her spirit was clear the moment she arrived. Lila welcomed her with open arms, and for the first time in a long time, Alina felt safe. She slept through the night without waking in fear. She ate without feeling tense. She spoke without choosing her words carefully. It was as if she had stepped into a life that belonged to her, not shaped by anyone else's demands. She spent time reflecting, not on the pain, but on how far she had come. She realized that revenge wasn't about undoing the past. It was about shaping the future. She used the quiet evenings to think about her next steps, her goals, the dreams she had put on pause. She had spent years trying to be small, trying to avoid conflict, trying to survive without causing waves. Now she wanted to create a life where she didn't have to shrink herself for anyone. Her mother called her on the third night. Alina answered with a soft breath, bracing herself not for anger but for the familiar sadness in her mother's voice. Her mother asked if she was safe, asked if she was eating, asked if she planned to return. Alina answered every question calmly, telling her she was safe, telling her she was rebuilding herself, telling her she wouldn't come back to live in the house again. Her mother didn't argue. Instead, she whispered that she understood. That whisper broke something inside Alina, something she didn't know was still fragile. Her mother had always been gentle, always swallowed her fear for the sake of keeping the family together. Hearing her say she understood felt like a gift, a small sign of hope that maybe her mother wanted freedom too. Alina told her she wasn't alone, that she could leave any time she wanted, that there were options, that she deserved peace as much as Alina did. Her mother stayed silent for a long moment, and Alina didn't push. She knew her mother needed time to find her own courage. It's the same way she did in the following days. Alina focused on rebuilding her life piece by piece. She reached out to her workplace abroad, reconnected with mentors, resumed projects she once feared she wasn't strong enough to complete. Everyone welcomed her back warmly, surprised but supportive, and that support fueled her in ways she hadn't expected. She began working again, feeling her confidence return with every task she completed. With each passing day, she felt more certain that she had made the right choice. Revenge wasn't something she carried like a weapon anymore. It was something she transformed into strength. She wasn't trying to hurt anyone. She was trying to rise, to become someone who didn't let her past define her future. That shift made her feel lighter, stronger, and deeply proud of the person she was becoming. But the true test of her growth came unexpectedly. One afternoon, as she stepped outside Leela's apartment to walk to a nearby cafe, she saw her stepfather standing by the gate. For a moment, her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected to see him. He looked different, less confident, more uncertain, almost lost. She felt her heart race, but she didn't let fear take over. She stood still and waited for him to speak. He approached cautiously, his steps slower than she remembered, and he asked if they could talk. She didn't answer right away. She evaluated him, the tone of his voice, the expression on his face, the tension in his shoulders. He didn't seem angry. He seemed troubled, almost humbled by the situation. She agreed to talk, but kept a safe distance. They stood across from each other, and the silence between them carried years of unspoken feelings. Her stepfather finally spoke. Not with authority, but with a strained honesty she wasn't used to hearing from him. He said he didn't expect her to leave so suddenly. He said the quiet in the house was startling without her. He said he didn't recognize the person she had become. Alina listened without interrupting. She didn't feel the old fear rising. Instead, she felt an odd calm. She saw not a tyrant standing before her, but a man struggling with his own fractured pride. He admitted he had been harsh, admitted he held the house too tightly, admitted he didn't understand how to balance authority with kindness. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was the closest he had ever come. For years, Alina had imagined hearing an apology from him. She imagined it would heal her instantly or satisfy the anger she once carried. But standing there in front of him, listening to his attempt at honesty, she realized she no longer needed it. She wasn't waiting for closure from him. She had created her own closure when she walked out. When he finally asked her to come home, Kina felt the world slow down for a moment. This was the choice the story had been leading to. This was the true climax she had to face. She could go back and accept the apology he didn't fully know how to give. She could stay away and continue her new path. She could let her mother stay trapped or inspire her to find her own strength. Alina took a quiet breath and told him she wasn't coming back. Not because she hated him, but because returning would mean stepping back into fear. She told him she had found peace within herself and she wasn't willing to give that up. She said she hoped he would change, not for her, but for her mother, for himself, for the life he was slowly losing control of. Her voice didn't waver. She didn't feel anger. She felt clarity. He lowered his gaze, and she realized he finally understood. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He simply said he didn't know how to be better, but he would try. Alina nodded, accepting his words without letting them pull her back. She walked away before he could say anything else. She didn't look back this time. She didn't feel the need to. Her heart felt steady, her mind clear, her spirit whole. She returned to Lila's apartment, closed the door behind her, and exhaled deeply. She realized then that revenge wasn't about changing the person who hurt you. It was about changing yourself. It was about taking back control, choosing peace, and refusing to let the past dictate your future. She had achieved that. She had walked through fear and come out the other side with dignity. That was her revenge.